county to use the Teamsters structure in presenting its proposals as well? Or was the county going to take a different structure and?
We were actually waiting to see what position you wanted to take with respect to that. If you all had turned around and said, let's throw out the old contract, throw out the old structure, let's just start anew and not even reference any of the prior articles, then we would have done the same thing. Look, there are some things in here that we obviously want to change just as well as you do. So we'll come back and we'll try to see if we can do it in a way that leads to the least amount of confusion.
That's what we attempted to do as well. Okay. So I just figured I'd ask as a matter of housekeeping if this sort of structure made sense.
Okay.
So in that regard, you'll see with agreement on the first page that I've simply substituted out the identity of the new employee organization. We're proposing that in the event that there are definitions which are common throughout the agreement, that it may be helpful to have a definition section simply by way of identifying certain common terms. So bargaining unit, parties were just two examples. It's just a organizational and structural idea, if it makes sense. That sort of section could encompass something like calendar days versus business days. It's just a handy way of having some guiding principles. We noticed that there wasn't such a definitional section in the other agreement, so this was one idea that came about upon review of the prior agreement.
Yeah, one of the things that we're going to have to do with respect to any definitional section is to actually come to an agreement on all of the provisions of the contract and then make sure that the definitions that we're using are consistent, because I can envision having somewhere in the contract where when we're referring to the county, we're not necessarily referring to all of these entities and vice versa. So I just want to make sure at the end of this thing that we're not spending our lives in arbitration over what the contract language means, because that doesn't benefit anybody.
Oh, absolutely, and I think the goal of the definition section is to obviate that situation.
Sure.
So I think that the definition section will be very limited in terms of what it will hold, as in some articles different terms will mean things differently. But if there is something that is subject to such that level of consistency, then we were hoping to accomplish that.
I'm just curious about this part about the officially chartered local chapter of the Volusia County Deputies Association. Is that part of the certification?
It speaks to IUPA's structure as an association of police officer unions, if you will. So they are part and parcel of us, but for distinct designation. That's why it's broken down accordingly. The certification itself references IUPA, and then it's IUPA's practice when it receives a certification to then charter a logo to correspond with that particular employer. That tends to be the practice, and the logo is, in that regard, part and parcel of the international for purposes of collective bargaining negotiations. That's how IUPA tends to conduct itself.
Where are the dues going to go? I mean, are the dues going to go to the local, or are they going to go to IUPA?
In essence, it's a combination.
All right, we'll get to that. I'm sorry, I just jumped in there because it wasn't an organization I was familiar with from the certification, so I figured I'd ask.
And I tend to be hyper detail oriented, so if there is any type of distinction that needs to be made or any clarification, I tend to just be very specific with the language. So.
We'll get along fine then.
Great. So it's a professional hazard. So that was what we did with respect to recognition is the change in the name of the employee organization. So the next is Article 2. I'm just going through and capitalizing parties as opposed to lowercase to have some consistency there. And in terms of employee organizational discrimination, you'll see there that it says membership, activity, or support, because I think sometimes activity and support can be interpreted differently. Sometimes support falls within activity, but just in terms of what we have experienced in the union side of things, that is the full complement, if you will, union activity as we see it. And then we have just a clarification in number 2 there. I think if something is going to go through arbitration, discrimination doesn't have to go through arbitration. Obviously, there are some employers which choose to relegate the adjudication of disputes to, outside of the contract as opposed to within the contract with certain types of discrimination. But we just wanted to make it helpful for the arbitrator because, of course, when the arbitrator makes decisions, they're limited to the confines of the agreement. They can't go beyond the agreement. And we just wanted to specify and make clear the application of circumstantial evidence within the world of discrimination. As oftentimes, especially these days, there tends not to be direct evidence. We just wanted to establish that as a means of providing guidance to the arbitrator.
So let me guess, you had an arbitration where the arbitrator wouldn't allow you to introduce the circumstantial evidence?
Well, it's that, I think the way federal courts interpret discrimination differs sometimes from Florida PERC, and Florida PERC tends to be more narrowly circumscribed, so when you have different authorities within, arguably within the state.
Well, now you're making my point, because usually I don't like these matters to go through discrimination, because the arbitrators half the time don't even understand the area of the law.
That's right.
And when the arbitrators don't understand the area of the law, somebody gets screwed, pardon my language. So either you're unhappy because the arbitrator made a really bad ruling on the admission of evidence or the ultimate determination, or we're really unhappy because the arbitrator made a bad call on evidence. And, as you know as well as anybody, is that when an arbitrator makes a bad call on the admissibility of evidence, we don't have any remedy. Whereas if we're in a court or even if we're in front of PERC, we can always go to the appellate court and say they got it wrong. So, look, I understand where you're coming from on this. So.
I just want to also make sure that we're comprehensive in our explanations. That way, hopefully, that might limit any questions or additional deliberations that you folks might have to make about the language. So, as clear as we can be up front, we like to be.
Yeah. Well, you probably can tell I'm not shy about asking questions.
Which is great. I too do the same. I can tell you that my parents would probably recount that their least favorite memory of me was a Y with virtually every single thing that occurred. That's just the nature of my personality. So, okay, management rights. What we've done here in the interest of streamlining the article is actually taking the 447-209 provision from the Florida statutes and inputting it there in terms of management rights. So. That is the verbiage from the statute itself.
Sure. But you do recognize that it's a reduction of the rights that existed under the Teamster contract.
It absolutely is a reduction of rights. That's correct.
Okay.
And we think that's appropriate. But we are happy to consider how we may be able to reach a compromise.
Is there something in particular that you don't like about us having management rights?
I would that's a pretty
Is that a loaded question?
It's a pretty loaded question there, Counselor.
I thought it was a pretty good question.
I think management rights is a sticky wicket. Sometimes you can be too overly defined, and then there could be something that could arguably be a management right which has been contractually foreclosed. I think it traces back to the old argument, is a broader definition or more specific definition best?
Well, wait a second. PERC's position is that when it comes to management rights, they have to be spelled out. If they don't spell them out, the general management has all the rights that it feels like having means nothing.
Well, if there are any particularized rights, they should be specified.
I know they're specified right there. But okay, I don't.
But you understand. We thought it was a little bit more expansive than what we had been used to seeing, if that made sense.
Not the first union that sat across the table from me and said, we're taking that out. I get it. All right.
And then two was just a language cleanup on the second paragraph. Some of these are just language grammar cleanups. The only addition is a cleanup under work stoppages, Article 4. But in terms of the latter portion of subsection 4, we thought it went just a little bit farther than necessary in terms of protecting the county's rights in this particular scenario. An instant abrogation of the entirety of the collective bargaining agreement we think would have negative consequences. We think this is a little too harsh under the circumstances.
Oh, you would agree law enforcement officers striking is pretty significant as well.
Well, I mean, it's again, we can't do so constitutionally, then we can't do so pursuant to 447. There's, I mean, it's pretty strong.
Sure.
And to instantly terminate the entirety of the contract, we think would not be advantageous for either party or a fair remedy.
Except this language worked, that they've never gone out on strike, so obviously this language was the key to it. So why would we want to take that out?
That isolated portion, if somehow we were able to attribute it to that language, we might be able to consider it, but we think it's a little, we don't think it's necessary to achieve the aims that the employer would hope to achieve. Okay, Article 5, personnel records. If I may explain as an overall concept.
Okay.
So there is the county, we understand that there's an official county personnel file. But there are also files with which the sheriff's office keeps itself. One of which I hear is colloquially referred to as the field file. It's a supervisory file. It's common in the police department, sheriff's office for the supervisor to keep a running file, if you will. And the same thing goes for any IA file that's being maintained on the individual. It could be conceivably, a lot of times there are 3 separate files, personnel files in the law enforcement world. So what we were doing in paragraph 2 here, using the language, actually specifically modeled off the language in paragraph 1, is that employees will likewise have a right to inspect these files maintained by their supervisor or an IA, of course, once an investigation has come to its termination, the administrative investigation, that is. But that they have those same rights with respect to those files as they do with the official county personnel file. And we think it can become a great tool for both management and labor to have the right to review, for example, the field file, because if a supervisor is keeping a file on somebody about what they think the individual could be doing better or what they shouldn't be doing, it would behoove the employee to be able to inspect that file and see if they can engage in dialogue with their supervisor to perhaps improve the behavior that the supervisor had noted in said file. That it would enhance the collaboration between management, supervisors, and the bargaining unit employees.
Has anybody been denied the right to see an IA file once it was public record?
Oh, I certainly don't think that an IA.
Or even these, pencil files or supervisor files?
That I have to check back on.
Okay.
We'll circle back to you on
Right.
that.
Yeah, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to distinguish between those things that you're proposing to change because and I'm using you kind of colloquially, the team, so to speak, has gone through and said, hey, there are ways to make this a little stronger, versus those things where you say, hey, we've had an issue over the course of the last few years that we need to address in the contract.
I appreciate you attempting to parse out that difference, because I certainly think that is a distinction. Response to a specific scenario or pattern of instances versus enhancing the language.
Because I assume you're going to ask the same question to me, so
and
I figured I'd ask first.
And just to, be perfectly forthright,
Yeah.
right? I think, in the interest, the IA file doesn't even necessarily need to be included, but then of course there's an issue with the language. If you have a limitation to a field file and then the IA file isn't mentioned, then there could be an argument that there is an entitlement to one but not the other. So 2 was just to be comprehensive about any type of personnel file maintained by the sheriff's office. And then in 3, the intent is to allow for the response to documents in these other files, should the employee care to make such a response in writing. Usually with a field file, I suppose, an informal conversation might be more practical within the confines of the job. But if the employee wanted to write a formal response to the supervisor, they would have the right to do so in the interest of keeping that in the file.
Okay.
I will have you know that I exercise an intense amount of personal restraint on number 4 here, not to expand the sunset to other types of discipline. We are simply, again, restricting the sunset to the written reprimands. But you'll note that we've changed it from a year to 6 months. The 6-month time frame, we think is fair in terms of I mean, if you're committing that same type of offense and within that short amount of time frame, then we think 6 months is fair enough to discern, well, have they really learned their lesson, or are they still continuing in a pattern of behavior? And the last addition that we have is new section 6. There are often times when an employee file is perhaps requested by an attorney, and the employees want to have the ability to know if somebody from the community, if somebody from the county has requested a copy of the personnel file and is reviewing it for something that, for example, outside the purpose of the HR department going through a personnel file in the regular course of dealings.
Well, that's what I was about to ask you, because if you take this language literally, anytime HR looks into the file to determine, what pay increases do, or if their performance evaluations do anything like that, then it would trigger the requirement to send an email, and I don't think that was your intent.
Correct. And I anticipated that there might be a counterpoint on that specific topic, which is why, I think the key there is requested. I think we can moralize clearly through our notes by way of conversation at the bargaining table that it's not to include such a casual situation as an HR employee reviewing the file in the course and scope of his or her duties.
See, now I thought that on 4B, where you said that you showed a lot of restraint, was just that you're going to take out that part about removing letters of reprimand from a personnel file. Because you can't do that.
And I do know that.
I know you know this.
Law,
I know you know this.
You have discovered my labor law geek side, yes.
Hey, I know you used to work with Kathy and Mark, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you know this stuff. You're well grounded in it.
This is the nature of what we do, huh?
Absolutely.
Okay, so.
So let's go to Article 6.
Okay, so there was what I thought was a somewhat odd reference to something that could possibly be construed as an entire agreement provision in the miscellaneous article, and then also there was a provision that could be construed as an entire agreement provision within the limitations on collective bargaining negotiations.
Like a zipper clause?
Later on in the, yes, that clause, talked more specifically about reopeners and what have you. Just in the interest of trying to maybe keep things more neat and streamlined, we decided to put in entire agreement here in addition to severability, and then put something in here specifically about memorandums of understanding. I think when something needs to be ratified versus when it doesn't by the membership can often really protract decisions sometimes that need to be made regarding the interpretation of an agreement. If it's just simply the interpretation of agreement, it doesn't need to be ratified, well, depending on the situation. We just wanted to allow the parties to have that ability to, they have the ability to enter into MOUs, but we wanted to make clear that this option is available to clarify language and that the employees consent to those types of clarifications being made during the course of the agreement.
So would that include a situation where we're actually changing the language or just clarifying? Because we get into that issue all the time with respect to whether or not you can actually change language in the contract, even if everybody recognizes it's a mistake, whether you can clarify it without having to send it back through ratification.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all factual and contextual a lot of times. But that's why not specifically or clearly set forth in the agreement to be clarified by the parties. The intent with that language is to capture that it's a clarification as opposed to a change, but, I mean, philosophically, one could say that a clarification could be a change. In order to obviate agreements about ratification, that's part of the intent of having this language too.
I understand.
So then, what I'll do is, in our proposals regarding articles that fall subsequently in the contract, if the entire agreement language is not duplicative, I'll import it if necessary, but the intent is to by including it here, to not include it elsewhere. And I'll explain these deletions when we get to those articles. Okay, promotions. These are all relatively minor changes because I think, generally the course and scope of a promotional exam or what processes will be used is generally, the sheriff is the one who takes care of that. And so in terms of what will be tested in a promotional examination process, the subject matter, we think it would only be fair if that's disclosed when the announcement's made for the promotional opportunity, to give adequate notice to study and make sure that the employees are aware of the subjects that they can anticipate in the promotional process.
What are we currently doing?
Well, there's.
I mean, you all know. I don't. What are you currently doing?
Well.
They let this. Brody let it talk. I mean, I don't want to violate something over here, but I'm just.
Well, I mean, what I would suggest is, to toss that question back to your folks on a caucus. I'll explain that there are some situations because of. That it can be, in terms of the process, anything in 3. You've got oral board, assessment center, combination of those. So for example, if the sheriff decides he wants to have grammar, a separate section for grammar that's not just in the written exam, we think it's fair that, the deputies be on notice that as part of the sergeant's exam there'll be a grammar portion or what have you. I mean, that's really the simple concept that we're trying to capture. Because there could very well, something could generically fall within A through E, but we wouldn't necessarily know the subject matter unless it was disclosed if it was going to be something like grammar. That awful grammar test. Okay, so the next item concerns the right to challenge questions on the written portion of the exam. And as I understand it, the current practice is that if an employee wants to challenge a question on the exam, taking the sergeant's exam as an example, they actually have to specify at the time they're taking the exam they want to challenge that particular question, which is somewhat counterintuitive as far as if you interpret a question a certain way, you may think, gosh, everybody else has to interpret it in this particular way as well. You may not be able to discern at the time you're taking the exam that your perspective is somehow contrary or different than another subjective opinion. It's just, quite frankly, not entirely fair to expect that someone would be able to challenge the question without actually seeing the outcome and what transpired. Perhaps the issue's even moot. So we have a limited time period that the question can be challenged, and that it's the sheriff's subject matter experts from the process itself that will adjudicate those challenges. Sometimes just a few points can make all the difference in the world when you're dealing with a ranked list. And that's just to enhance fairness for the employees. The only other thing that we ask is once since the lists are yearly, once a new list has been certified, the union be provided with a copy of that list. Eight bulletin boards is simply the substitution of.
I think I got this one. But there's, am I missing a page? Because I got the 14, I don't have the 13.
13's bad luck, so
I was going to say,
excluded it.
excluding the 13.
That's good strategy.
When we take a break, we'll print 13. I don't know where it went.
It's like the elevators.
Well, then let's proceed past, the bulk of the changes to Article 9 are actually in that first page, which it seems was neglected by the printer to be printed. So we will caucus and print it out and provide you that first page.
Okay. I don't know, Article 10 has more red than black, so that can't be a good thing.
So the article sort of represents a change to how the union is notified as to changes to the policies and procedures, in essence, the internal departmental manual. So as the language in the Teamsters, most recent Teamsters agreement indicates, there's no provision for advance notice. It's simply that within 60 days of the implementation of a new change, that employees shall receive a copy of that. And so we think that when it comes to policy changes, that it's often much more effective if the union's provided with advance notice of those changes before it's implemented, in case there are any immediate red flags that can be resolved, prior to its implementation. And so this provides a 21-day notice period before formal adoption and implementation of the changes. And it just clarifies that, just to make sure, because we've got some entire agreement language that corresponds with this, that you can't be a mandatory subject of bargaining that's covered by or referenced by the agreement.
You're trying to get rid of the waiver. Come on. You don't have to pull punches. You know what this language means. I know what it means.
Well, then I suppose we need not engage in much explanation. We also wanted to provide a little bit of structure on any impact bargaining as far as filing a charge with PERC. There's 6 months, but we just wanted to make sure that there's a time frame to streamline any request for impact bargaining. Normally, I wouldn't want to assign a time frame, and then, because it's in essence the union waiving something here, but just in the interest of keeping things more streamlined.
I'd say you're all heart, but I'd be accused of being sarcastic, which I have once or twice.
And then also that the language, again, be provided to the employees. So we put 30 days as opposed to 60 days. It just seems strange that within a 2-month period that the employees wouldn't be provided with that specific policy change. And if a long time frame does elapse, and I think 30 days is fairly significant. So if an employee can't be charged with an infraction that regards the new policy.
Yeah.
Okay. So when the agreement's ratified, we get a copy of the current departmental manual. And so in addition to the notice, the 21 days, that also, if the version has been changed, if any last minute tweaks have been made by the sheriff's office, that then we get a final version of whatever policy will be implemented prior to implementation. So that's a 21-7-day.
I understand.
Okay. Individual rights, the next Article 11, just a clarification that this employee who does not go through the union in terms of representation on a matter, that it's the individual rights and remedies that the employee has that he can move forward with without the representation of the organization. And I understand that, or I would assume that the initial intention of this language was to encourage informal resolution of issues prior to becoming grievances. So we added that the time frame for filing a formal grievance pursuant to this agreement shall be told if the employee does want to make this effort and engage in informal resolution with his or her immediate supervisor or other departmental official, so that they can continue to preserve their rights if need be. Then we also just wanted to clarify that if the employee does bring forward a formal grievance, let's say it concerns whether or not he was promoted or something of that nature, that the union can't be controlled by the interpretation of the contract that's rendered in that particular decision where the union is not a party to the agreement. So we thought it easier simply to say that those decisions won't have precedential value when resolving other future grievances.
Understand.
No changes to Article 12. And it appears the same for Article 13 as well. So this is 1 through 13. We'll obtain the other page that was not copied.
Right, we have a pretty colored one for us.
We do, but before I get to that, if we can take a brief caucus so I can obtain the other page to our proposal.
Sure.
Just so we can tie that off first amongst the staff right here.
No problem.
All right,
How long do you want?
10 minutes.
Yeah, fine.
Do you want to get that set up so that you know what you do that?
Wow. The tank project. Where's this at? I don't know.
Are you guys recording again, Chandra?
Right now.
So apparently the copier was the weakest link on our team right now, and we did not get the second page of the first page of Article 9, the union representatives article. So this was probably one that we could have scrapped and done totally anew because the terminology used by the Teamsters is different than the terminology used by IUPA. But what we've done is tried to import the IUPA terminology in to replace the Teamsters terminology. IUPA has a business agent, and then the president or the president's designees then would constitute representatives as it's then defined. And then what we've added here is as we sit in the Volusia County, what's primarily the teachers union office, this is a provision not unlike that which is in the Volusia County teacher's contract, and that's a provision of release time associated with the president's position. You'll find that in paragraph 4.
Who's the president?
The gentleman sitting next to me, Brody Hughes, is the current president. And it's just standard release language.
Well, it's an expansion upon what currently is, right?
It is an expansion upon the release time, the leave release time that's currently provided. That's correct. But the language itself, in terms of this type of release, is fairly standard. By that I mean the right to return to the position, no loss of seniority, the continuation of benefits.
So, kind of, just from a quick eyeball of the proposals that you've given us so far, my takeaway is that your proposal is to reduce management rights and expand union rights.
Oh, I don't think that's I don't think it's susceptible to such a generic categorization like that. I think it's always a balance, and there's always a give and take. And we have certain items that we're proposing, and we'll be proposing in subsequent articles. Ideally, everything will balance itself out as give and take. But I noted, as compared to other contracts that I've negotiated, or my colleagues at IUPA have negotiated, that it just seemed like the language was a bit more expansive than it is in other agreements in terms of what is indicated as management rights in this particular contract.
Well, I will take you at your word, and I will look forward to the articles that provide us something about that.
Well, and you certainly can propose articles that will.
Well, you just said you were going to balance it out later on, so.
Well, I was simply meaning that negotiations in and of itself is a balance.
I'm just giving you a hard time. I understand,
that's not allowed. I mean.
But no, but look, in all seriousness, I mean, you do recognize that the first 13 articles that you gave us, you're reducing our management rights, you're reducing our rights with respect to the ability to implement policies and procedures, and you're expanding union representation rights.
Well, that's right. I mean, the articles that we gave you are very specific. Some are continue to remain status quo as they previously were in the Teamsters contract. So, in terms of material changes, I think this is a fair mix of articles which have been changed, those which haven't been changed. I think the articles are susceptible to a myriad of different categorizations. I would say that there's now a more appropriate balance of management rights as compared to how it was previously. And then what I think is the absolute most important topic for this contract negotiations for the union, and I don't think I step out of bounds by saying this, is wages. Certainly the dollars and cents always are the most substantial topics of interest to both sides in contract negotiations. But we thought that because of how substantial and important this issue is, especially to rectify, in the interest of rectifying a problem that we've observed in terms of how the bargaining members are paid, we want to bring it up early in the very first session that we're having, both to emphasize its importance and to pass out, as we have at the end of the table there, a wage survey that was based on public records obtained by our international union.
Just not to cut you off, but do you have an actual wage proposal?
Our wage proposal will be forthcoming.
Okay.
And part of that is, although it is a bit unconventional, oftentimes, and I'm not proposing that we engage in interest-based bargaining per se, meaning the goal is a certain wage increase, let's work together on how to get there. I was hoping to discern, and the union was hoping to discern, and perhaps get some input so that we could structure our proposal in a way that might in fact be more feasible right out of the gate, as opposed to something that would just be perhaps instantly subject to rejection by the employer. So,
well, I don't instantly reject anything.
okay.
I mean, the thing is that if you give me a wage proposal, regardless of what it is, I'm going to cost it out. I'm going to take it to the sheriff. I'm going to take it to the manager, and I'm going to take it to the elected officials.
Oh, of course, and I certainly, allow me to correct my previous phrasing. I don't think that, I certainly wouldn't expect that any wage proposal would be instantly rejected. But what I'm simply trying to say here is that upon first blush and looking at something, one can usually discern if this is a non-starter or if it's something that might have, get some movement. And without beating around the bush, We've, I think, got a serious issue as far as how deputies and sergeants are paid here in Volusia County as compared to other sheriff's offices. And without, beating around the bush too much, I think our principal goal is having some type of step plan in place. And of course, there are lots of different incarnations of step plans at various sheriff's offices and police departments throughout the state. And in terms of how to structure that actual step plan, that's something that's sort of the conversation that we would like to have to sort of take the temperature and see, how many steps versus less steps. Perhaps talk more collaboratively about that concept and how to structure it in a way that might be, that the county might be amenable to. With that being said, I think there's some underlying information that is important to explore, because certainly this is not one of these negotiations where we're coming to the table and saying we deserve a wage increase because we deserve a wage increase. I think as a general statement, there should be some sort of substantive base for a wage increase, and in this case, it exists here in spades. And what I mean by that is it appears that there's both a problem with retention of deputies and bargaining unit members, as well as the ability to recruit. Brody will be able to give you some more specifics in terms of how both of these situations exist at the sheriff's office, but I think we have also, everybody has a copy, okay. What this study does is reviews a number of different police departments and sheriff's offices, and I'll let Brody chime in here as to why these counties or departments as opposed to others.
Well, what we looked to do on this was to create an apples-to-apples comparison of our wages to other sheriff's offices. That way there's no trying to say, well, this place contributes to their pension, this place doesn't. If you compare a sheriff's office to sheriff's office, everybody contributes 3%. Just about every sheriff's office that I'm aware of in the state has a take-home car policy. So there shouldn't be this, like we've had in the past, where, well, we're going to discount this because of that. We wanted to bring forward to you guys a document that compares us on plane with everybody else. So what we looked at is, or the parameters that we placed on it were looking at it based by agency size and population of the county. The Volusia County is currently 10th in the state as far as population, and they fall about the same for the agency size of the sheriff's office. So we took the first 9 sheriff's offices, we added Volusia County Sheriff's Office to be 10, and then we added a couple behind it to show you sheriff's offices that are just below Volusia County in size and population. And then the one that we did pull from another area that was further down the list was the Flagler County Sheriff's Office, because they are a sister county. So as we...
They're a sister county because they're contiguous?
They're a sister county because
they're next door?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I meant, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
By contiguous,
Yeah.
And look, I don't disagree with you, is that we should be looking at the counties that touch us, because that is kind of your local operating area. But if you're going to do that, you want to touch all of the counties. And so the thing is that while you have Seminole, Brevard, you have Seminole, Brevard, and Flagler, you don't have Lake, and you don't have Putnam. And I understand what your argument is with respect to size, but they are contiguous counties. And so if you're going to apply that methodology, that you're going to look at all of the counties that surround us, then you have to look at all of them.
Well, the goal wasn't to look at necessarily the counties that surround us, but I mean, if you'd like us to add in Lake County, they do make more than us also.
I'm just saying is that if you're going to use that methodology, but let me just ask you, in what way are you arguing that Miami-Dade PD, which has a population of 2.6 million, has 2,685 employees, is a valid comparator to Volusia County Sheriff's Office?
Again, what we had tried to do to show you guys where everybody was at was to start at the top and work our way down and say, okay, if you start at number 1, you work your way down, okay, comparatively, looking at those numbers, okay, here's where Volusia County rests. They're number 10 in the state by population and size of an agency. So what we were trying to demonstrate there was that, okay, we expect Miami-Dade County to make more money than the Volusia County Sheriff's Office. We're not sitting here trying to suggest that we should make Miami-Dade money. But we believe that the Volusia County Sheriff's Office needs to be somewhere closer towards the 10th spot in the state and not being down around 28 or 29.
They're 10 based on what? Officer population or population served or?
The size of the sheriff's office is the 10th largest sheriff's office in the state and also by population.
And if I can also chime in to say, unions don't necessarily have to perform these types of studies when a county does them regularly, and we think this is data that the county should be endeavoring to explore itself.
Except that never in a million years would we be even looking at what Miami-Dade, Broward, or Palm Beach County, look at, or what Pasco's County. We look at local market area.
I mean, we would absolutely love to see any, personnel studies, any comparators that the county has or wants to design. Without, I believe, gosh, Brody, how long has it been approximately since?
Better than 10 years since the county's done a wage study for the sheriff's office.
Yeah, and in that time, you negotiated a whole bunch of contracts, and you all could have done the same study.
We have done studies. We
okay.
have presented studies, and they get discredited.
You all agreed to the contracts at the table every time.
Well, we're here for the one that.
Right, and I understand that, and, it doesn't, let's not digress, let's move forward. I agree.
Well, I think the one point that can't be parsed out, because I think certainly it's possible to argue that perhaps other counties or other sheriff's offices maybe, you should add this one or subtract this one, or you can come up with a lot of different thoughts on perhaps how comprehensive, how few should be included, but I think the overall point is one that glaringly can't be ignored, and that is what the overall pay is, and more specifically, not just the starting pay, but there's a serious issue with respect to wage compression. So, and I think what highlights that especially is if you look at, for example, page 12, the average salaries of deputies, and it breaks it down after a certain number of years of service, and you can see a departure and also very small increases, and sometimes because of raises that have been given in subsequent years, people who have more years are making barely more than, and sometimes less than, other employees who have been there less time. And so what that ends up doing is creating, it inhibits desire to stay in this, with this particular sheriff's office. If there's another opportunity elsewhere, folks have transferred and are transferring, and then it also impacts whether or not someone wants to come to Volusia County in the first place to have their career with the sheriff's office here, or perhaps a neighboring county where they could make more money, quite frankly. So between, and all this data is data which is based solely on public records, but you can see, and the same goes for sergeants as well, how the pay differs considerably from other sheriff's offices.
All right, so let's, look, I haven't had an opportunity to look behind any of these numbers, but let's assume that they're all correct, that exactly what you're saying is correct, and that there needs to be an adjustment on the range, and there needs to be something to be done with respect to compression. What are you proposing?
Well, see, we will in subsequent sessions have something more definitive on pay, but we wanted to get the wheels started now on our conversation about it. That this study is directly a product of effort that the union has engaged in to try to have a full and fleshed out and comprehensive discussion about wages. And one of the most vital pieces, we think, is quite frankly what folks are making elsewhere. So early in the game to have this type of information, I think, is a distinct advantage.
Right, but look, you've been doing this long enough, I've been doing this long enough, and we could sit here and argue till the cows come home as far as whether any of these particular agencies are valid comparators, that's not going to get the issue. The issue is that you've identified what you believe to be a problem, and assuming you're correct, what are you proposing to do, and what's it going to cost us?
Well,
And that's really, at the end of the day, that's going to resolve this issue. And I'm not saying, that, we don't appreciate the fact that you put this together, because it's helpful to know why it is you're proposing what you're proposing. But without the actual numbers so that we can evaluate it, this is just kind of numbers in a vacuum.
well, if you want to foreclose conversation about wages until we actually have a concrete proposal, then, certainly that may be the county's prerogative, but our goal was to start the conversation on this issue, and to make sure that the county was privy to the data that the union has and worked hard to assemble, as the county has no personnel studies of its own. And we wanted to also emphasize, because this is the very first contract session, not just in this, for this collective bargaining agreement, but between the parties in general, we thought it especially important to emphasize that wages is the absolute #1 issue, and that we believe, whether or not, we could argue until the cows come home, or regardless of the county's impression, that there's a serious problem here in terms of both attrition and folks who are transferring out of the county, and inability to get folks to apply. And so those are other hard statistics and data. This is simply one piece of the puzzle.
Do you have that data?
We don't have that data at the moment, but I'm sure, well, not only does the county have that data, but...
Well, but you're the one that's making the assertion that we're having this issue. What data do you have to support that assertion?
Well, at this present moment, what we have are a series of, it's know-how based on facts gathered from inquiry. So, and this is all in the effort of having a conversation. If you don't want to talk meat and bones until we have an actual proposal on the table, we're fine and happy to do
But what I'm
that.
telling you is I'm more than happy to have that conversation with respect to where the wage ranges should be, what should be done about compression. I'm not foreclosing that. I'm just saying is that I can't have an intelligent conversation about it without knowing what it is that you believe is necessary to fix the problem that you're identifying.
Well, I think long and short of it is an increase. What that actually shapes up to be is something that we'll provide you in a standard, normal form proposal. But as the county, to my knowledge, didn't have any such assemblage of data, we thought it might be helpful, as this is the first session, to know what data that we have looked at and examined as far as pay comparatives. So just to inform our conversations as we proceed, especially with wages when there is a real concrete reason to justify an increase, that's when information is even more essential. So the more we think that you can have up front, the more we can have up front, the more of an educated decision and educated process we can have.
Well, we appreciate the effort that put in this. No, seriously. Obviously there was a lot of work that went into this, and we appreciate it.
And simply also to emphasize the importance of the issue as well. So there are no bones about it when it comes to this priority. And Brody, can you perhaps speak to some of those additional details about why this situation has really, come to a head, if you will, or why there is perhaps a need as greater than a need before?
And I kind of go into your point about data, and I'm going to put Captain Summers on the spot. I know Ms. Pridgeon's new in her position, but the last number that I heard is that we were somewhere around 50 positions short. We're hemorrhaging positions faster than we can fill them right now, and it's just a matter of time before somebody gets hurt.
Why are they leaving?
Because of pay.
No. Are you sure you got that data? Can you provide me that data?
Well, let me ask you this.
Where are they going?
Are these folks going to other law enforcement agencies?
Yes.
Okay. Who are we losing to other law enforcement agencies?
I know one from the other day that put in his resignation because he's going to move to Montana and take a 49% pay increase up there to be a law enforcement officer. Now, that's not comparative to local economy, but several years ago I lost a young man to the Tampa Police Department because he went from making Well, within the last 3 years, he went from making $37,000 here to $49,500 there. You know, so yes, we're losing people because of pay. And we have a morale problem because of pay. We have guys in this agency currently that are making within a dollar or two of what they started at better than 10 years ago. You know,
A dollar or two what they started at?
Yeah.
How can that be? They've been getting 3% wage increases every year. How can it be?
The lower, because the starting salary was lower when they started.
But it's not the same pay. You can't say they're within a dollar of the same pay. That's not correct.
So you're
If I
compressing
made $30,000, I made $30,000 3 years ago, you're saying I'm making $30,001 today. That cannot be. That cannot be.
They are within a dollar or two of current starting pay.
You're starting pay, but not when you say the pay, that's incorrect. Because you can't say, if I made, my example would be $30,000, and I'm making a dollar more than I did 3 years ago, that would be $30,000 and $1. That is totally incorrect.
What I would like to say at this moment is, our general intention was to raise the issue, and the union has an opinion based on what it's perceived from working with the membership, working within the Volusia County Sheriff's Office. We would be exceptionally happy to provide you with individualized, detailed examples should you desire them. They're also entirely within the custody and control of the county as well.
Right,
So-
but the thing is that, yes, they are within the custody of county, control of the county, but the thing is that when we're looking at the data, we're seeing different things than the data, you know, than you're taking away from the
Would you
data.
like, can you bring that forward to us so that we can see
Sure.
what you are looking at?
Sure, we can go ahead and we could very easily pull the turnover and identify, who's, when we terminate somebody from employment for cause, that's not turnover. I mean, that's not turnover attributed to wages. If somebody works their normal retirement, they enter drop, and then they drop, that's not normal retirement. And look, Freddie, I'm not sitting here, and frankly, I was trying to avoid this conversation because I didn't want to get into this, back and forth over what the data is, who's right, who's wrong. What I want to do is I want to get to the point where we got proposals in front of us and see if we can come up with something that works, both from the standpoint of that's going to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish for the membership. But look, keep in mind is that we have a budget, and I have to, and when I say I, on this side, ultimately, I can't do something that isn't supported by the budget. And so we're going to have to ultimately try to come up with some way where we can accommodate both issues. We're not going to do it by arguing over whether or not Joe Blow left to go to Montana because he loves big sky country or because he got a better job. And I think you're right. I mean, I understand why you raised this issue. And we get it, that wages is a very important issue to the union and something that we're willing to sit down and have some serious discussions about.
Just one last point, and Captain Summers, you may know the answer to this. How many background check requests has Seminole County Sheriff's Office made to Volusia County here in the last couple of months? As I'm hearing, it's over 20 now. That's 20 deputies looking to go elsewhere.
We don't know. I mean, we'll look into it. Yeah.
Well, and so in that regard, okay, our mission has been accomplished.
Yes.
We have raised the notion that that it's the union's impression, I think it's the members' impression, I think that there is a serious issue about discrepancy in pay. That is our opinion, that is what we've stated, and we have set it forth as a priority. This is just some of the data that we are relying on as we continue to accumulate additional data. Our hope is to have a conversation that's not simply founded in opinion, but that we're able to provide you what we have as it progresses, because in the interest of when we do have a proposal, it can be a genuine and true back and forth. So we can also have any additional data that we receive, we can provide it to you. We want to have as comprehensive of a picture as we can when these crucial decisions are being made. So, and I certainly know that you've heard the speech about how the folks who are sitting out there put their lives at risk every single day, and I don't need to belabor that.
Great group of folks.
But it's
Absolutely.
it's very true.
Look, I know that when it comes to union negotiations, people tend to think that because we disagree with respect to a proposal on wages or benefit, that it's, we don't like law enforcement, that we don't care about them. It's just not the case. It's a good group of folks. We appreciate every day the job that they do. And my hat's off to every single person that goes out there, puts on the uniform, wears the badge. They have my utmost respect. And that doesn't mean that I'm going to agree with every proposal on the table. And I would just hope that when we go through this process, and we are going to have disagreements, because there's never been a negotiations where you haven't had disagreements, and there's probably going to be times that we're going to walk out here not happy with each other. And that's the way it works. But I just hope that at the end of the day, folks realize that we're all trying to do a job and get to a place where we can get a contract that we can live with. And this is, none of it's meant to be personal.
Well,
And I'm not saying that you're suggesting that you were, saying that, but I just want to make sure that everybody who hasn't been involved in the negotiation process, and they're looking from the outside in, isn't thinking that just because we're disagreeing on something, it's an indication that we think less of them as employees.
Well, there may be times, both in, as there have been in this session and subsequent sessions, where the opinions of the union, based on opinions received from membership, need to be conveyed. It may not explicitly be tied to a proposal, but it may be part of the overall conversation. And so that's all. We wanted to highlight the importance of the wage issue. And I'm sure we can pick out individual examples, but I mean, suffice it to say that we're here not simply because it's a gratuitous ask. We think that there are bases in fact, and we invite you to explore those within your own data. We'll share what we have, and we will present something to you in a subsequent session that we can zero in on and go to the mat on, if you will, however you'd like to phrase it. But suffice it to say, you are now aware of our #1 priority with this contract. And that's what behooved us is to emphasize that as we sat down for the first time today.
Okay. Appreciate that.
Do you folks have any proposals for us today?
No.
Okay. Do you have any idea of when we may be able to have the first set or?
When you give us an entire contract. I mean, I'm not negotiating the contract. If you give us an entire proposal, we'll give you an entire contract.
Just wanted to see what your
Yeah.
intentions were
Yeah,
as
no,
far as the
that is-
introduction of proposals.
Yeah.
So, because certainly we're not required to give you an entire
Of course
proposal
not.
before we receive proposals from you folks. But I just wanted to see what the intention was.
Well, but the thing is that you've already told me that, there's, look, if I just sat here right now and looking at these proposals in a vacuum, there's very little that I would agree to, at least when I say agree to, obviously, that's me just talking personally. Ultimately, I'm going to talk to the team and they're going to make the ultimate decision on this, but what we have right now, to the larger extent, is a package proposal taking away our rights and giving the union more. And, we may very well agree to some of these things depending upon what we do with some of the other articles. And so I'm not taking the position that we need to see an entire contract just to be a jerk and say, we got to get everything on the table. But as you know, it's an entire contract and things tie in, and sometimes you're willing to give on this article if you can get something on another article. And so that's the reason that I take the position that I want to see the entire proposal, especially when we're talking about wages. And I assume you're going to have some other proposals where you're going to have some asks that are going to cost money in addition to the wage increases.
Well, there are a number of different approaches to take with negotiations.
Sure.
You can give all the proposals at once. You can, as your priority, you can do it in order of priority. I was simply trying to discern what we can expect from you folks. I do think it's a bit unconventional, however, to not provide a single proposal about priority issues to the county until all proposals from the union have been received. That itself is a bit unconventional.
That's the way I've negotiated for 30 years.
But that's...
So I guess I've been unconventional for 30 years.
Well, that's not necessarily...
I've been accused the worst.
Not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's important for housekeeping to know, what the county's intentions are. So that's the nature of that question. Is it easier, do you have any questions? I understand there are no proposals. Is there anything that we provided that you want to inquire about at this time?
No, I think we've pretty much asked the questions that we need to, I think we have a good understanding of what you're asking for, understand this and understand understand the proposal. No, we have nothing else.
And is it easier to wait until you have access to your calendar I'd like to try to keep things trucking along and obtain a subsequent date in terms of the procedure to do that. I mean, I have my calendar. I'm happy to take it out right here and plan something. I don't know what's best procedurally for the county.
You know what, if you could give me some proposed dates, I can send you an email tomorrow morning. As soon as I go back, I would, under normal circumstances, I would just call my office manager to keep my calendar, but she's recovering from a hospitalization. So I need to actually go in and get the calendar. And I'm happy to go ahead and schedule some dates.
Great.
And get this thing moving forward. I kind of heard some murmuring back there that, it's been 6 months and, without a pay increase. Kick me if you want, but why don't, it's no secret that 3% was budgeted by the county for this year for pay increases. Tell you right now, go ahead and we give you 3% across the board, retroactive to October 1, and close out this fiscal year that we're currently in, and keep these negotiations going forward for a contract that starts October 1 of 2017. And this way these folks get some money in their pocket while we're moving through these issues.
Well, if you'd like to propose that, but I've heard that you don't want to provide us with anything until we've actually given you all our contract.
No, I'm just saying, just leave everything the way it is right now for this current year. Keep doing what we're doing, take 3%, you're okay with that? 3%, give everybody a 3% pay increase retroactive to October 1. And that just forecloses negotiations for fiscal year 16-17. And then the contract that we're negotiating right now, these proposals will be for a contract that starts for fiscal year 17-18. This way these folks have money in their pocket, not asking for anything in return, and you're negotiating a contract going forward with 3% more in your pocket.
So if that's an actual proposal,
That's an actual proposal.
Then I would appreciate something being conveyed in writing as is customary when contract proposals are delivered. So we have something in our hands as far as the nitty-gritty, as everybody knows the devil's in the details. And certainly if that's an option, we'll take it back and discuss it and come back to you with our position on that.
Mm-hmm. All right, what dates do you have that you want us to look at?
I am going to be back at the county office next week for the week after.
That I have 2 arbitration hearings. I have an arbitration hearing on the 21st.
I got one the last week of
Yeah.
June.
Aren't we together on the 19th?
That's right. Mm-hmm. That is the day within
Yeah.
that week that I'm.
Oh, that's why you're here. Okay.
You want to talk about the 20th, 21st, 22nd?
I am 20th, or I can't do 21, but 20, 22, 23.
The 20th, 22nd, and 23rd?
Let me check on it. 22nd.
That's ambitious on my schedule without, I just know, that's ambitious for me.
All right, well, let me see what I can do as far as cobbling the team together. Try.
Is the team static, your team, or?
No, that's why I said I'm gonna cobble the team together. It's,
Okay.
I mean, to the extent possible, I'm gonna try to avoid not holding sessions just because, one person's not available. If we can do the negotiations, without somebody, in somebody's absence, I'm gonna try to get the negotiations done. So I don't know how you all feel about that, whether or not, your team's static or you have to have everybody there, but, that's the way I'm looking at it.
Okay. So then you'll email me back about the.
Yeah, I'll email you tomorrow. So, well, it's nice to finally meet you.
Likewise. We have a lot of work to do.
We'll get it done.